Evening and good to see everyone here. I know all of you know this, but for these recording purposes, I would like to officially introduce Thay. So for those who doesn't know Thay, Thay's ordained name is Thich Truc Thong Phap. We address him as Thay, which means teacher. So Thay's from South Australia. Now Thay has moved from Gladstone to a town called Petersborough. It's still in the southern Flinger Ranges. So Thay has a long and varied career in the human services, and Thay was fully ordained in 2005 and has worked as the university chaplain and offered contemplative care in the area of palliative care. So since 2007, they has trained in clinical pastoral educations and has worked around 14 years as a supervisor and educator of chaplains in training. They is currently living with his beloved dogs, Joey, and unfortunately, Lucy just passed away last week. So our condolences to Dave for the passing of Lucy. So may she be well and happy now. Well, these honest and humble teachings always radiate love and warmth to the hearts of all who are fortunate enough to encounter his wisdom. So we're always fortunate to have Dave to come here and provide his teachings and his wisdom to us. So again, let's put our palm together and welcome Dave to today's talk again. Over to you, Dave.
Thank you very much, Meredith. We'll start with about 10 minutes of meditation. Is there anybody in the group who does not normally meditate and who needs some instruction or some guidance? I think everybody meditates. So we'll just sit quietly for 10 minutes. You probably all had something of a busy day, so you can let this time be a time to really relax deeply and come home to yourself in the quiet and in your sitting room. So find a way to sit comfortably, and we'll start the meditation now. We can't get a bell to work on on Zoom, so I'll just say bong bong bong, and you'll know that we've begun and we've finished. And I won't interrupt your meditation. We'll just sit quietly together. Bong, bong, bong. So gently bring yourself back into the room. If you need to stretch or massage yourself, please feel free to do that. Maybe your shoulders need to roll your shoulders. If you've got old shoulders like me. So first thing I'll do is a little chanting in order to acknowledge respectfully and lovingly the Buddha. Namo Shakyamunaye Buddhaya. Namo Shakyamunaye Buddhaya. Namo Shakyamunaye Buddhaya. We'll
Beautiful chanting, Thay.
Sorry?
Beautiful chanting.
All right. And I also want to acknowledge the original owners of this beautiful island continent, all the different peoples in all the parts of what we call Australia. And particularly for me, I want to acknowledge the Nukunu people of this part of South Australia and acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging. Thank you very much for another invitation to talk to you. Tonight I'm going to give the third in a short talk about my own teacher, the most venerable Thich Thanh Te, who's a Vietnamese Zen master, 100 years of age, living in Long Tan in South Vietnam, or the southern part of the country. Tonight is the last of 3 talks I'll give on some of his basic teachings in Buddhism. And in October, I'll give a talk on my experience of caring for my little dog Lucy as she died, which has been a very profound and beautiful experience, though very sad. And in November, what I want to do is I'm going to go through all of the Dharma talks that I've given this year and pick out things that I think I didn't clarify well enough. So it'll be a bit like a fruit salad, but this time I'll add some cream to the fruit salad so that it tastes really nice, hopefully. And I don't know how many of you know, but not this weekend, but the following weekend, I'll be coming to Sydney and staying at Vejasala because my dear friend Bomhyon Sunim and I are leading a retreat for 3 Buddhist chaplains from the Australian Defence Force. So we've got, I think, 2 men in the Navy and 1 in the Army who are all Buddhists and all training to be chaplains. And we're coming together for a retreat. And it's a rather interesting irony because during the American war in Vietnam, I was a conscientious objector to that war. And now I find myself supporting ADF chaplains. So that's an interesting thing in itself. And I enjoy it. I enjoy listening to the kinds of situations that they encounter and listening to their their understanding of their work and their understanding of the Australian Defence Force. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm also looking forward to staying at Vejasala, which I only know because of the background. Yes, the background. Anyway.
Oh, that's Vijayasala.
Sorry?
That's Vijayasala.
That's Vejasala.
Yeah.
Now we have Meredith. There you are. So it'll be lovely to get to Vejasala and see it and meet up with Meredith and Patricia and other people there too. Okay, so here we go. And tonight there'll be a shortish talk, and then you'll go into those rooms and have a conversation with each other based on a question that I'll ask. So in the last few Dharma sharings, I've considered the basic approach to the Buddhist way contained in the teachings of my teacher, the Most Venerable Thich. We've considered in the last little while our thoughts, words, and deeds as determinants of the lives we create. And we've considered the impact of them on others, of how we live our lives. The Buddhist teachings refer to these as karma or action, and vipaka or the fruits of our actions, our thoughts, words, and deeds. And my teacher sees this as the basis for understanding the rest of the practice of Buddhism. Our actions can be either wholesome or unwholesome, and its fruit can be either beneficial to ourselves and others or harmful to ourselves and others. Individuals and groups, such as the whole human species, can engage in both wholesome and unwholesome action. And perhaps one of the more obvious ways in which our actions are unwholesome and are causing and are bearing unwholesome fruit is in the area of climate change and war. With the unaware repetition of unwholesome action, we develop unwholesome habitual patterns of behaviour. And that came out in the story of the young man in Hobart who was driving his car along, escaping from the police, if you remember. His behaviour was coming out of a whole lot of habit patterns that I think he was largely unaware of. With the aware repetition of wholesome action, we develop wholesome habits. So this is not rocket science, this is almost basic psychology. That if we repeat certain kinds of actions, we become habituated to those actions. And if they're wholesome, then we produce wholesome habits. If they're unwholesome, we produce unwholesome habits. Well, there was a great monk, Mahagosananda, who was the leader of the Cambodian Sangha after the end of the Pol Pot regime. And in his little book, Step by Step, Meditations on Wisdom and Compassion, it included what is the following verse. He said, "The thought manifests as the word manifests as the deed develops into the habit into the character gives birth to the destiny. So, watch your thoughts with care and let them spring from love, born out of respect for all beings. If we do the latter, then we can be sure that we are creating wholesome fruits in the world around us." Now, we are helped in this process by keeping what we call the Five Precepts, the ethical principles received when a person becomes a card-carrying Buddhist. To transform unwholesome action and demonic habits into wholesome action and the habits of an enlightening being, Thich suggests that practitioners engage in the observance of the five wonderful precepts, or what he also calls the five virtues. And we are to do this along with taking refuge in the three treasures. Buddham saratnam gacchami, dhammam saratnam gacchami, sangham saratnam gacchami. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And these three refuges are what strengthen us to be able to live a life of wholesome and ethical proportions. So when I transmit the 5 wonderful precepts to lay people here or wherever I'm doing that, I use an English version of the Vietnamese iteration found in my own bamboo forest tradition. And the 5 precepts are spoken in this way. I undertake the training to avoid killing living beings and to cultivate loving kindness and compassion. I undertake the training to avoid taking that which is not freely offered and to cultivate generosity. I undertake the training to avoid sexual misconduct and to cultivate contentment and respect. I undertake the training to avoid using harmful speech and cultivate kind and moderate speech along with deep listening. I undertake the training to avoid the use of drugs and alcohol and to cultivate a healthy mind and body. And that's the format I use when transmitting the precepts. Adopting these supports for living a fully wholesome life involves 2 interdependent practices. Firstly, we avoid unwholesome thoughts, words, and speech, thoughts, words, and deeds. Or secondly, we adopt wholesome thoughts, words, and deeds. Or we adopt what Buddhism calls virtuous action. But there's more to this process. In our reflection on our practice of the precepts, what do we learn about ourselves? It's not just a case of obeying a bunch of rules and turning yourself into a good person. It's also a matter of what you learn about yourself from the practice of the precepts and your reflection on them. So let me give you an example of my own from living with my monastic precepts. As a monk practicing with the Dharmagupta Vinaya and the Bodhisattva precepts from the Brahmanet Sutra, I am bound to the practice of celibacy in my life. That is to say, no sex. In a vast selection of old Chinese sutras called the Daini Honzoku Zokyo by Sung Yuan Yulu, he says, in order to know the way in perfect clarity, there's one essential point you must penetrate and not avoid. The red thread of passion between our legs that cannot be severed. Few face the problem, and it is not at all easy to settle. Attack it directly without hesitation or retreat, for how else can liberation come? Very straightforward. So how freeing do I find that statement of Sung Yuan Yulu? I find it very freeing. The fact is, I'm a sexual being. I am imbued with all of the instincts, feelings, and physical responses that are necessary within all life forms for those life forms to continue. Without sex, species will die out, of course. To be a sexual being is not in itself immoral, any more than it is immoral to experience the need to eat. In fact, if we don't eat, we'll die. If I don't have sex, I won't die. But sexual desire, according to Sung Yuan Yulu, cannot be severed, and so I must face it. We cannot not be sexual beings. So, in my case, where there's the precept of celibacy, I have to face up to the problems that arise when I attempt to live out this precept. In our last Dharma sharing, I told you the story of when I was about to enter a Christian monastery 35 years ago. An older Catholic nun asked me how I felt about entering the monastery. I said that the only thing that concerns me is the commitment to celibacy. Her very merciful and truthful response to me was, the red thread, never goes away. And at that time, the sister was in her mid-60s. She'd probably been a nun for 40 years, living with that truth, practicing that precept. I can tell you quite truthfully that throughout the last 20 years of being a monk, I have on many occasions felt very strong feelings of attraction to others. I have wanted closeness, intimacy, and sex itself. I have a good friend I'm able to talk about my desire with when I discover that I experience great emotional and sexual longings. When I explore them with my friend and I discharge all the feelings associated with my desire, especially embarrassment, the acknowledgement of that sexual desire diminishes it. Now, when we look at the Four Noble Truths, the first noble truth is the noble truth of suffering, but each of those noble truths is divided into three parts. And the first part of the first noble truth of suffering is the necessity to acknowledge the suffering. Once we acknowledge the suffering, it doesn't have the same control over us. And it's the same with sexual desire. Once I acknowledge it, rather than pretend it's not there at all because I want to be a goody two-shoes, once I acknowledge it, it doesn't have the same control over me. It doesn't have the same power. I am, at 71 years of age, no longer chained to the beast, which a friend of mine once used as a term to refer to being younger and being hormonal. I'm not chained to the beast as I was as a younger man. Sexual desire arises, and as a result of not acknowledging it in the way that I do, it passes away. And then, of course, it returns. And when I face it again, it goes away. So one of the things that I have to do is to constantly acknowledge the truth of my experience. And when I do that, that experience has less control over me than if I'm pretending it's not happening at all. If I acknowledge that sexual and emotional yearning in a safe and respectful context, I am not overwhelmed by my feelings, and I don't have to suppress them. I don't have to pretend they are not there. This much I've learned from living with that precept. Like Mahatma Gandhi, when asked if he had broken his vow of celibacy, I too can answer, not yet. It's a lovely line from Gandhi, where he's asked, have you ever broken your vow of celibacy? And he says, not yet. There's a great humility to that. And I can say the same thing. If you ask me, have I broken my vow of celibacy? I can say, not yet. I don't expect to, but who can tell what the future holds? What I have discovered when I've really been close to wanting to give up on my vowed life and return to sexual relationships is that I'm a monk. I spent years getting to the situation where I was ready to be ordained. I've lived a very active life as a monk, and when I appear to myself in a dream, I'm always a monk. I've learned that I love my life as a monk. I could not be happy any other way, and I know it. Why then would I give up this life I love for something that could easily change and come to an end like a sexual relationship? I have learned about myself that I am a monk, and that's my primary commitment and my primary desire. When a love relationship I had in my mid-20s came to a painful end, a Buddhist friend suggested to me that now was the time to put the roots of belonging down into my own heart. I took that advice, and over the first 10 years of my monastic life, I learned how to live closely with myself. I learned that the experience of putting the roots of belonging down into my own life actually enabled me, on the one hand, to be at ease with being alone, while on the other hand, I learned to be close and loving with many others. I could sit in the shade of a beautiful tree without needing to chop it down and take it home. Finally, I want to share with you a quote from Zen Master Dogen, the Japanese founder of Soto Zen. He said, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. No trace of enlightenment remains, and this no trace continues endlessly." Now, I don't fully understand what Dogen is saying here, but what I understand so far in my reflections on it is that to become increasingly aware of who I am through my practice of life is to become increasingly aware of the Buddha way. Who I am and what I learn about myself is not separate from the way of truth and love. And living the life of the precepts is a very, very kind of efficient way of learning about myself. To study the self, at the very least, is to discover that all that I am is in a state of constant change. I am empty of a separate and self-existent me. I am the constant interplay of ever-changing causes and conditions. I am not other than you. I am not other than the clouds. I'm not other than the sun. I'm not other than the flowers. I am held together with my beautiful little Lucy, even in death, by the light and love inherent in the world, in the whole of this universe. To learn about myself and not to hold on to the sense of self that arises is to be actualized by myriad things. This leads us into the great emptiness, sunyata or shunyata, realized by such as Buddhadasa Bhikkhu and proclaimed in the Heart Sutra. So the invitation tonight is to go into your rooms. I think, how many of us are there? I think there's about 13. To go into your rooms of 3 rooms of 3 and 1 of 4, and consider the question. You've got that's the question. In my practice of the 5 precepts, what have I learned about myself? And you'll have, I think I've given you 15 minutes. That's about 4 minutes each, or 3 minutes if you're in a group of 4. And it gives you a couple of minutes either way to get started and finish. Are there any questions? In my practice of the 5 precepts, what have I learned about myself? Okay. So when you're ready, off you go. And remember that you are also meant to listen to one another, not just to talk at each other. Okay. So the question was, in my practice of the 5 precepts, what have I learned about myself? Who would like to start?
I think yeah, in our room, I was mentioning that I'm not exactly sure what I've actually learned, rather than observing the impact of the precepts on society in general. For example, like I was saying that if you look at it, a lot of the problems in families and in societies can eventually be linked to the underlying cause of a negative um, adherence to the precepts. Yeah. That's one point I was trying to make, and the other point I was making is some there is intentional and unintentional actions or thoughts. So, and the challenging part was if, in terms of the first precepts, say if you have your children been under threat from, say, a wild animal, right? And you have the means to kill the attacking animal, then the precepts goes out of the window. If your human instincts come into play, you want to defend your loved one, and probably having to kill the wild animal or intruder into your house coming in to murder the family, and you have a gun. What do you do? So that's the challenge for the in relation to the first precept, and in relation to the third precept, Suli was saying. So I can't speak for Suli. I guess you could explain what you said earlier, Suli.
Oh, I was just saying that, you know, sometimes, you know, you come up with white lies, but, you know, if the outcome is good for you and good for the others, then, you know, it's still breaking a precept. And it's still breaking a precept. So,
Yeah,
you know, if the outcome is not good for, you know, the other people, but good for you, so maybe then that it should not happen. But if it's good for everyone, then, you know, so pretty much it's not so black and white. And yeah.
So
Richard gave a great example.
Sorry?
Richard gave a great example. Richard, you want to repeat your example about having tea at somebody's place and
part of our discussion was you know, interpretation of the precepts, and is it black and white, and sometimes the dangers of taking too simplistic a view of the precepts when a more nuanced understanding might be relevant. So the example I was giving is when Suli was talking about how, you know, a lie is a lie. But, you know, if you're invited to someone's place for tea and they serve you a cake and the cake tastes awful, and you say, "Oh, that's a great cake," you know, okay, so that's a white lie. But I mean, it's a spectrum, isn't it? I'm not quite sure that the precept is principally intended to cover off that situation. But we had a great discussion. Look, while I'm on the microphone, one of the things I had learnt personally was that my understanding of the precepts had evolved over time. So, you know, when I was young, I understood theoretically what these precepts were, but they didn't really have much impact. As I got older, I could see the consequences of not observing those precepts for those around me and on the news. And, you know, that sort of sank a bit lower, sunk in a bit deeper, and I could understand, oh, if you kill someone or if you steal someone, it has these consequences. And there's, you know, people crying, and there's people on the news, and there's, you know, whatnot. And I could sort of understand it a bit more. As I got older, I thought about, well, you know, how much of this is just conditioned? And then I discovered, as we all probably do, that we've all got a conscience, or hope we've all got a conscience. And so this feeling about what the importance of the precepts was kind of linked to a growing development of my own personal conscience. And sort of in more recent years, particularly with my, you know, interest in meditation and reading about Buddhism, but particularly with meditation, and we talked about this too. In our group, we talked about how there's a fundamental interconnection with other people, a growing realization that we're all the same. We all have the same needs. We all have the same wants. And we all want things like respect and trust and to be loved. And when that sense of connection and similarity with other people grows stronger, so does the relevance of those precepts. And so we talked about how those precepts are not just for society and for family as consequences of following those precepts or not following those precepts, but on a deeper level, in terms of learning about ourselves, it's about a recognition that we're all the same and we should all be treated in a way that's, consistent with those precepts. Sorry, I talked a bit too long.
When you were talking about wild animals coming to your house and killing your family, that's largely what you talked about last time when you talked about was it flies or something, and then Sue mentioned that the ants that invaded her apartment building and that sort of thing. So when I think about what you might have learned, and I'm just going to propose this, and you can say yes or no, of course. Did you learn that you're not an absolute pacifist?
No.
There are limits to your...
There are limits, yeah. I
Yeah.
have to admit. Although I'm a practitioner, I do recognize that there are limits to my my ability to adhere to the strict interpretation or to my understanding of the precepts. Yeah. So I'm just a human, and not an arahant yet. Maybe maybe if at that level you could be more, probably more tolerant.
I'm not sure that this question is trying to find out whether you're perfect or not, but,
Yeah.
but what it is you know about yourself as a result of practicing that. And what we also know about ourselves is that we're constantly changing. So what's true about you now may not be true about you in another year or something like that. So that's why we can say that there's no real he at all. That is concatenation of changing causes and conditions.
In my next rebirth, I will be different again.
That's true.
Yeah, I think Bill has something to say. Yeah. Bill, you unmute yourself. You're still muted, Bill.
Yeah, I found it interesting in your Vietnamese translation of the first precept. It said, no killing of human beings.
Did I say that?
Yes.
Oh. Well, I don't mean that.
I didn't think you did.
I thought you did.
Let's have a look. I'd be really surprised if I did, but I'm quite happy to be held to account.
Thay said, living beings.
Oh, living beings.
Again, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, in that case, it would have been my hearing. Yeah.
Did you learn something, Bill, about yourself from your reflection on your relationship with the precepts?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's my biggest one. I mean, I'm vegan. I don't like the killing of animals and things like that. So, but I became a vegan before I became a Buddhist. That hasn't changed my attitude. That's all. But since I became a Buddhist, I've stopped killing all the insects in the house and things like that. If there's something that I can take outside, I do so. Yeah.
So what has that taught you about yourself?
I believe in the interbeing or the non-self. If I damage them, then I'm damaging myself somehow or other. Yeah. Yeah, there's consequences. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm more compassionate these days. Yeah.
You're a good guy, Bill.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I went to Kynan's day of practice the other day, and he spoke a bit, obviously the no alcohol for the day, etc. But he also includes social media as an intoxicant. I think that's a pretty good point.
So the intoxicant, now we have widened the specs to include social media rather than the alcohol.
Yeah. So
So Bill, just now you were saying that you were vegan way before you're Buddhist. So so even when you were vegan, you still kind of like can't stop yourself from killing the mosquito, is it?
well, to be honest, I haven't experienced mosquitoes in the house for several years. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I got lots of bees in my garden. I love them. I'll go and take photographs of them. Close up. So, yeah. Yeah, that's just me, I think.
You're a good person, Bill.
I try.
It sounds like you don't have to try very much.
Yeah.
It all
You are
kind
just
of comes
being,
naturally to you.
just being yourself.
That's one of the things I read today, somewhere about Ajahn Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, who was the great Thai master, and his whole attitude towards nirvana or nibbana. And his view was that we don't have to wait for some amazing time in the future when we've got it all together. We're experiencing nibbana right now when we're present to things, or when we quite naturally love living beings and we don't want to harm them. So in those, I just thought about it this morning, in those moments, like your choice to be a vegan because you didn't want to harm living beings, and that's already the Buddha mind at work in you, and you don't have to wait until 7,000 lifetimes from now for that to be real in you. That's real in you now.
Yes.
That's a cause for celebration and joy, is that within me there is this great potential and it's being realized even as I speak. That's a lovely thing.
That's nice to hear.
Thanks to Buddhadasa Bhikkhu for his wonderful teaching.
Yeah.
Anybody else? What you've learnt about yourself from practicing the precepts?
When we were talking about the precept on speech, and of course the social lies come up, and as white lies, that's kind of thing. When you lie so that the other person doesn't feel rejected or whatever.
White lies.
The white lie. But one of the things that I learned a while back when I was making a conscious effort not to tell such lies, is that if you can actually speak the truth, which is, might be something like, I'm sorry, but I'm too tired to come, or, I'm sorry, I've got too many other things on and I just can't take on anything more, or whatever. It's actually a way of lightening your sense of being. When you tell a lie, even a very well-intentioned lie, you have to keep a mental track of that so that you don't accidentally reveal to the person that you've lied to that you didn't tell them the truth. And that is the kind of mental load that is with you a lot of the time and kind of weighs on you. So it's just another thing that you have to remember. Whereas if you can actually tell them the truth in a way that's not rejecting and not hurtful, then it's over. It's done with. You don't have to think about it anymore.
So what do you learn about yourself in reflecting that way on the precept, Sue?
I feel a lot personally. There's quite a lot of gain for me in observing that precept, even though I might have been telling lies out of fear of offending the other person previously. That if I can be strong enough to tell the truth, it's freeing for me. I don't. Maybe it's freeing for them. I don't know. But yeah, there's a greater lightness of being that comes from telling the truth.
So the truth will set you free. As another great Mahasattva once said.
Yeah, today I really learned this from Sue about, what we think, like we're trying to, it's hard for people to say no sometimes, but it's what Sue said that, by not saying no, sometimes you actually create a burden for yourself. Sometimes it's subconsciously you're carrying this burden even to yourself. That's what Sue said, that okay, yeah, I will do this tomorrow, I will do that. It's kind of like that is also to yourself. That is also like, oh, you have to have that mental, record of like, oh, okay, so I say that I'll do this, or I didn't say that to I so that I don't say that these things to the other person or something. So I think that is true that you kind of create certain burden to yourself as well by not telling the truth. But I think for Richard's, something like what I learned is like something like if we say something about food, you really don't really like that cake. But what we can do is like, instead of saying that, oh, I really like it, it's just like maybe try to look for something that is positive to say. The decoration is pretty good.
Yes.
Rather than, like still not telling the lie, but I think sometimes it's like trying to look for the positive side of the certain things. There will be some positive things, among the things that you really don't like, I guess.
You could say, oh, wow, what a beautiful cake. I'm sure my Trucs will love it.
Yeah.
Oh, may I just say a few
Yes,
words?
Frank.
Oh,
Because
Frank, I've been waiting.
because, well, you were talking too much about cakes. I was a pastry cook for 70 years, practically. And we had a small cake shop in Rosebery that's a bit close to the airport. Anyway, Saturday morning, for example, I made a lot of apple strudels, vanilla slice, and hardly any people coming in. And I was worried, what shall I do on the end with the cakes? So a lady comes in, morning, how are you? Gee, I said, you lost a lot of weight, darling. You think so? Oh, of course. Give me another half a dozen apple strudel. So it was a lie because she was just as fat as before. But I managed to sell the vanilla slice and the apple strudel, looked after my family. So I know it was a lie, but it made her happy. So what do you think, Thay? If the lie makes someone happy, is it fair or according to the precepts?
I'm not going to answer that because then you think, oh, well, Tay said I could do this. But what I will tell you, Frank, I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a story about my relationship with a Hungarian woman. Okay.
Ooh.
Here we go. The Anglo-Celt meets the Central European. That's what I call this story. And this is, I'll explain it afterwards. When I was doing my master's degree at the University of South Australia, I had a friend who was from Hungary. And she would quite often say that Australian universities weren't very good because they in a Hungarian or in the Austro-Hungarian world, you always had to study philosophy along with everybody else, so that fitted you to be more reasonable and that sort of thing. And then one day she said to me, you know, Anglo-Saxon is a Celtic language. And I said, no, Anglo-Saxon is a Germanic language. And the Celtic languages are Irish and Scottish, Manx, Welsh, Cornish, and Breton. No, you're wrong. Anglo-Saxon is a Celtic language. And I said, well, you know, my ancestors invented all of those languages, and I know that Anglo-Saxon is Germanic. It's not Celtic at all. And she just said, no, you're wrong. And I didn't know what to do with that. When someone says you're wrong, and I know I'm right, do I just go on arguing, or do I? And so I just stopped, and I thought to myself, I probably will never have a conversation with that person again because I don't know how to manage that kind of way of speaking. And I had a boss who was from a Hungarian family, so I said to her, "This is what happened with this Hungarian lady," and my boss said to me, "You know, we Hungarians often find you Anglo-Celts difficult because you're so polite, you never really say what you think."
Oh,
And
that's
and
interesting.
I never said, and I thought to myself, well, sometimes I don't want you to know what I think, but I won't say it because that's not very polite. Because, and I realized that there are times when not telling the truth is part of your cultural conditioning. She was able to speak her mind, and I couldn't, because for me that would have been offensive. So that, you know, my relationship with honesty is as much conditioned by my own ethnic background as anything else. And so how do you overcome? Do you give up your ethnic, your cultural background so that you can be just as rude as everybody else? Or what, you know? So it's a complex thing, you know. I was brought up to be polite. I can't not be polite. It's
You know why, Thay? Because your history is much more peaceful. The Hungarians had 1,000 years of wars, never stopping. Once the Russians, Russians, never ending. We only had 30 peaceful years. So the character has changed also.
yeah.
We cannot help it. But she might have been wrong, of course, being a Germanic language. But you cannot tell that to an Englishman.
No, and I think sometimes I find the same with Vietnamese people, that they're quite blunt, and I don't know how to respond to that because of my background. But also the Vietnamese have had thousands of years of conflict with the Chinese, and then with the Americans and the French and each other. You know, there's just,
Yes.
I understand that from their point of view. That,
what is right or what is wrong and so on. I think we're very usefully bringing in to understand the cultural background and the history of which then leads to that moment when that person says is right or wrong, or even how much they stick to what they believe is right or wrong, isn't it? There is so much cultural, there's so much historical aspects to it.
yes.
Yeah.
Going back to the precepts and going back to what Meredith was saying about when you are asked to judge, it reminds me of the Dalai Lama being invited to be one of the judges, you know, in those days, that cooking series. I can't remember the title now, where the judges will taste the dishes and they will say which chef cooked the best dish.
Master Chef.
Master Chef, that's right. No, the Dalai Lama attended Master Chef, and the three judges asked the Dalai Lama, and he was taking his turn, to have to say which food by which chef was the best. And the Dalai Lama gave the best answer, because he fundamentally comes from the belief, thou shalt not judge. Judgment in itself, there is an inherent ethical error. So he says, in my judgment, everyone is number one. Everyone has done a great job and put in a lot of hard work, and it is the best dish for each of them. I was really moved, and he actually practiced it. At the end of the show, the important thing for him was to go into the kitchen and say thank you to each of the chefs for cooking all those wonderful food for him and others to eat. Now, I think that follows all the precepts that we're talking about, including not to be judgmental, especially when we're invited to be judgmental.
That's good.
Yeah. It's a very good example, Engkong.
Oh, I want to be very careful when somebody asks me, what do you think? Is this wrong? Is this better or is that worse? And it's all relative. And it is all depending on circumstances and conditions. Like what Dogen is saying and what Thay is telling us, isn't it? Because even to study the self, we gradually realize it's impermanent, it's changing all the time, and there's no real substance to it. We realize there is no self. And when we realize that in the deepest possible way, we're further enlightened. There comes some more peace, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what the precepts are about. To realize. I mean, in our threesome, all the three of us spoke about how it is the unhealthy self or the narcissistic self or the huge ego in the bad sense is what gets in the way, and that makes us commit all those ethical mistakes of killing or lying or sexual misconduct, whatever, isn't it? So when we are able to really dissolve the ego or trim the narcissism, as we continue on the path, to use Buddhist terms, and on the path, there are moments of enlightenment. There are moments of, I'm not necessarily following no killing, no misconduct or whatever, but there are moments that we realize everything is relative, and we realize what we're saying, what we're doing, is it to enhance ourselves? Is it for our sake? Is it to get more power or more money or whatever? Or is it fundamentally good? Not only for myself, but for everyone, for every living being, isn't it? That's the crux of it. And by that stage, we are further in the path towards realizing no self and towards and having moments of enlightenment in this lifetime, isn't it? Every time we listen to a talk by Thay, we get moments of enlightenment because we're getting to this absolute truth in a sense, whilst most of the time we live in a relative self, in a conventional self. There are very few moments that we can live in that no self.
From what you're saying, one of the things that I'm taking away is that if we gave up judging, because everything is relative, then we would also not be judging ourselves. And that would bring us a lot of freedom and a lot of lightness as well, that I'm not going to judge myself. I'm not going to, like the Dalai Lama, I would say, well, I can see that you're doing your best, your very best. And after all, life isn't easy, So you're doing your best in the face of all the dukkha that you're going to encounter. So I'm not going to judge you.
Because I was also thinking he's also looking at the intention of the cooking, isn't it?
Yes.
If the intention of the cooking is to get first prize, I'm not going to give anybody the first prize and the second prize and the last prize, because the intention is already wrong, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas if the intention is to enjoy it or to do your best, that's very different, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Without judging oneself and judging the fellow competitors or whatever, isn't it? Which is very hard to do, of course.
I feel that we can even go deeper and deeper into this topic, and we need another hours of like dwelling in these topics, I guess. You know? Yeah, but I'm aware of the times. It's already 9. So, Thay, do you have any last words to wrap up tonight's evenings? About
No, I just
any
hope
message?
Yes, my message is have a good night's sleep.
Oh,
That's just
well,
as important as anything else, is make sure you get a good night's sleep.
yeah.
I'm intending to, so.
Well, I just have to let everyone know that, Sangha member like this providing teaching for free. So if anyone would like to offer dana, so you can go to our website, just indicate the dana is for which teacher. So we will help to offer that dana to the teacher. So before that, you mind giving us the blessing to end the night?
But before I say that, why are New South Wales people having a public holiday on Monday? What's it for?
Labor Day.
Labor Day, October.
Yeah.
So you have Labor Day the same day as South Australians have it. There you are.
Oh, yeah.
May the wholesome energy that we have generated here tonight and at any other time in our lives be for the benefit of all living beings. May all living beings be well and happy. May all living beings be free from suffering. May all living beings know peace and joy and the causes of peace and joy. And may we all continue to walk the Buddha's path of truth and love together. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, Dave, for your teaching tonight. And thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. It's a pleasure having all of you. We hope to see you soon and the following week.